On the 15th of March, 44 BC, the most powerful man on earth was stabbed 23 times on the floor of the Roman Senate. His body was cremated. His ashes were scattered. And with them, every last trace of Julius Caesar's DNA disappeared from history forever. Or did it? Because in the last decade, scientists have done something extraordinary. They have excavated the bones of hundreds of ancient Romans, senators, soldiers, merchants, slaves, from beneath the streets of the Eternal City. And hidden inside those bones is a genetic story that reaches all the way back to Caesar himself, to the bloodline of the Julii, and to a secret that Rome never wanted the world to know. Julius Caesar carried haplogroup R1b, but that single letter and number contains a genetic journey spanning 15,000 years, from the Eurasian steppe across Bronze Age Europe into the Italian peninsula, and eventually into the veins of the man who conquered Gaul, bedded Cleopatra, and changed the trajectory of Western civilization forever. This is Julius Caesar's DNA test result, and what it reveals will change how you think about Rome. Gaius Julius Caesar was born on the 12th or 13th of July, 100 BC, in the Suburra district of Rome, a dense, noisy neighbourhood of taverns, craftsmen, and crime. Not the marble halls you might imagine for a future dictator. His family, the Julii, claimed divine descent, not from a king or a general, but from Venus herself, goddess of love. Through her son, Aeneas, the legendary Trojan prince who supposedly founded the Roman bloodline after the fall of Troy. It was an extraordinary claim, and Caesar never let anyone forget it. His father died when Caesar was just 16, a sudden death that may, modern geneticists now suggest, have been related to the same neurological condition that would later haunt Caesar himself. He was left in the care of his mother, Aurelia, by all accounts a formidably intelligent woman who shaped her son's education personally and refused to leave it to tutors. And before we go any further, stay with us, because later in this video we are going to reveal the hidden condition that ran through the Julian bloodline for generations, and what modern medicine says it tells us about Caesar's genetics. By his mid-20s, Caesar was already in debt, already in danger, and already making enemies in the highest offices of the Republic. He was captured by pirates while crossing the Aegean Sea, and held for ransom. He spent his captivity chatting with his captors, writing poetry, and promising, with a smile, to return and crucify them all. They thought he was joking. He wasn't. When the ransom was paid, he immediately organised ships from Miletus, sailed back, found the pirates still anchored at the very same island, and captured nearly all of them. Then he crucified them. Julius Caesar was not a man who forgot. He would go on to conquer Gaul, modern France and Belgium, in 8 brutal campaigns. He invaded Britain twice. He crossed the Rubicon. He defeated Pompey. And in 46 BC, he made himself dictator of Rome, the most powerful person in the known world. And he would be dead inside 2 years. Here is the problem that geneticists have had to solve. Caesar was cremated after his assassination. No remains, no bones, no usable DNA. So how? Can science tell us anything about his haplogroup? The answer came from the ground beneath Rome itself. In 2019, a landmark study published in the journal Science by researchers from Stanford University, led by Margaret Antonio, sequenced the genomes of 127 ancient individuals buried in and around Rome, spanning 12,000 years of Roman history. It was the most comprehensive genetic study of ancient Rome ever conducted. What they found was stunning. By the time Rome was founded, roughly 750 BC, The genetic makeup of central Italy already closely resembled modern Mediterranean populations. The population was descended from three ancestral streams: Neolithic farmers who had arrived from Anatolia roughly 7,000 years ago, European hunter-gatherers who had lived in the region for tens of thousands of years before that, and a third wave, Bronze Age migrants from the Eurasian steppe, carrying haplogroup R1b. That last group is crucial. Haplogroup R1b, specifically the subclade R1b-U152, also known as R1b-S28, is the dominant Y chromosome lineage among Iron Age Italic speakers, the Latin people, the founding stock of Rome, and according to population genetics modelling of early Republican Rome, it was almost certainly the haplogroup carried by the patrician class, including the ancient clan of the Julii. So Caesar was R1b. But where did that lineage come from? And where did it go after him? R1b traces its ultimate origins to the Pontic-Caspian steppe, the vast grasslands that stretch north of the Black Sea and Caspian Sea in what is now Ukraine and Russia. Around 5,000 years ago, these steppe pastoralists, associated with the Yamnaya culture, began one of the greatest migrations in human prehistory. They moved west into Europe, south and east into Asia, and they carried their Y chromosome with them. By the Bronze Age, R1b had swept across Western Europe. It is the dominant haplogroup today in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Spain, France, and northern Italy. When the Italic-speaking peoples crystallised in the Italian peninsula around 1000 BC, R1b-U152 became their genetic signature. Caesar, born into one of Rome's oldest patrician families, almost certainly carried it. Now, the condition that science says ran through the Julian bloodline and may have altered the course of history. Caesar's body was not just famous for what it achieved, it was also notable for what it suffered. Ancient sources, Plutarch, writing around 75 AD, and Suetonius, writing around 119 AD, both describe episodes of sudden collapse during Caesar's later life. Suetonius wrote that he was subject to sudden fainting fits and disturbance in his sleep, and that he was twice seized with the falling sickness while engaged in active service. The falling sickness, the ancient term for what we now call epilepsy. For centuries, historians assumed Caesar had epilepsy. A 2004 paper in the journal Epilepsy and Behaviour, written by Dr. John Hughes at the University of Illinois, concluded that the 4 episodes described in ancient sources were most likely complex partial seizures. Caesar probably had epilepsy. But in 2014, researchers at Imperial College London published a counter-argument. Doctors Francesco Galassi and Hutan Ashrafyan reviewed the same ancient evidence and concluded that Caesar's symptoms, late onset, associated with weakness, dizziness, and what Plutarch describes as a sudden failure of his senses, were more consistent with transient ischemic attacks. Mini strokes. Neither camp has conclusive proof. Caesar is gone, and his DNA with him. But here is where the genetics become extraordinary. The 2004 epilepsy study noted something that historians had largely overlooked. The condition appears to have run in the family. Caesar's own son by Cleopatra, Caesarion, reportedly had seizures as a child, and 2 of Caesar's relatives through the Julio-Claudian dynasty, Caligula and Britannicus, also had seizures in childhood. Remember that name, Caesarion, because what happened to him is one of the darkest moments in this entire story, and we will come back to it. What makes this genetically significant is simple. If epilepsy ran through the Julii, it suggests a heritable neurological variant passing through the family line, possibly linked to the same haplogroup markers associated with early Italic aristocratic families. We cannot prove this without Caesar's genome, but the pattern in the historical record is striking enough that geneticists take it seriously. In the autumn of 48 BC, Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria, Egypt, in pursuit of his defeated rival Pompey. What he found instead changed his life, and potentially the genetic future of both Rome and Egypt. He met Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Now here is something that surprises most people. Cleopatra was not Egyptian by blood. She was Macedonian Greek, a descendant of Ptolemy the First Soter, one of Alexander the Great's generals, who had taken Egypt as his share of the empire after Alexander's death in 323 BC. Her haplogroup is believed to have been among the Macedonian Greek lineages, likely J2 or E-V13, the dominant haplogroups of ancient Greece and the Eastern Mediterranean. A world genetically apart. From Caesar's step-derived R1b, Ptolemy the 15th Caesar, known to history as Caesarion, Little Caesar. He was born in 47 BC and recognised by both parents, though Caesar never formally acknowledged him in Rome. Mark Antony later declared Caesarion to be Caesar's true son and heir, a declaration that made him a direct political threat to Caesar's adopted son, Octavian. Caesarion was the genetic meeting point of two of the most powerful bloodlines in the ancient world. In his veins ran both Caesar's R1b steppe ancestry and Cleopatra's Macedonian Greek heritage. He would have carried an extraordinary genetic blend: Western European steppe ancestry from his father, Eastern Mediterranean ancestry from his mother. A genetic union of worlds that had not met before. And Octavian had him executed. Caesarion was 17 years old when he was killed in 30 BC on Octavian's orders. With him died Caesar's only known biological son. The Julian bloodline, through Caesar's direct male descent, was extinguished. So what do Caesar's DNA results actually look like when science reconstructs them from the Roman genome pool, the Julii family pattern, and what we know about early Iron Age Italic genetics? His Y chromosome haplogroup was almost certainly R1b-U152, also called R1b-S28. This is the signature lineage of the Italic-speaking peoples of Iron Age Central Italy. If you are a man with Italian ancestry today, and you carry R1b-U152, you may share patrilineal ancestry with the same population that produced Julius Caesar. It does not mean you are his descendant. His direct male line ended with Caesarion, but you carry the same ancient Y chromosome branch. His autosomal DNA, the genome inherited from both parents, would have reflected the classic three-layer structure of Republican Roman aristocrats. Roughly half steppe ancestry from the Bronze Age migrations, about a third Anatolian Neolithic ancestry from the farmers who built the first European civilizations, and a smaller fraction, perhaps 15%, of the oldest genetic layer, Western European hunter-gatherers, the people who painted the caves at Lascaux and Altamira. Now here is the most surprising thing about Caesar's genetics. The part that connects him to a region of Europe he conquered, not the one he ruled from. The R1b-U152 lineage is most concentrated today not in Rome, not in southern Italy, but in the Swiss Alps, in northern Italy, in France, in the Celtic Italic borderlands. When Caesar campaigned in Gaul, slaughtering and enslaving hundreds of thousands of Celtic warriors, he was genetically closer to those Gauls than to the Near Eastern populations that would flood into Rome during the imperial period. The man who crushed Celtic Europe shared his deepest ancestry with the people he destroyed. Julius Caesar's direct male line ended, but his genetic legacy did not. Through his adopted son, Augustus, through the Julio-Claudian emperors, through the women of the Julian family who married into Roman aristocracy across the empire, the genetic material of the Julii dispersed across Europe. Modern population genetics estimates that a significant fraction of Western European men carry R1b-U152, the same Y chromosome branch as Caesar's ancestral lineage. Not his direct descendants, but carriers of the same ancient steppe migration that produced the Italic peoples and their greatest general. The 2019 Stanford study also found something else. By the imperial period, Rome's population had shifted dramatically toward Near Eastern and Eastern Mediterranean ancestry. Migrants from Syria, Greece, North Africa and Anatolia flooded the city. The genetic profile of a Roman citizen in 100 AD looked very different from a Roman citizen in 100 BC. The capital of the ancient world was, genetically, the most diverse city on earth. Caesar stood at the hinge point of that transformation. Born into the old Italic patrician stock, R1b, steppe ancestry, Latin blood, he built the empire that would absorb the entire Mediterranean world into a single genetic and cultural melting pot. And then he was killed before he could rule it. On March the 15th, 44 BC, Caesar entered the theatre of Pompey for a meeting of the Senate. He had been warned. A note was pressed into his hand that morning, naming the conspirators. He did not read it. 60 senators attacked him. He received 23 stab wounds. Only one was immediately fatal. His body was cremated at the request of his family. His ashes were placed in the Julian family tomb, and with them went the only physical evidence of his genome, gone forever, 3 weeks before what would have been his 56th birthday. What remained was his legacy. His adopted heir, Octavian, hunted down his killers, killed Caesarion, defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra, became the first Roman emperor, Augustus, and ruled for 44 years. Every Roman emperor for the next century styled themselves a Caesar. Every German Kaiser and Russian Tsar took their title from his name. The word Caesar became the word for supreme power. Julius Caesar left no biological son on the throne. His direct Y chromosome line ended in the death of a 17-year-old boy on the orders of the man who would become Rome's first emperor. But his genetic heritage, R1b-U152, the steppe ancestry of the Italic peoples, the DNA of the civilization that built the ancient world, lives on in millions of men across Europe today. Science cannot give us Caesar's genome, but it has given us something almost as remarkable: the ability to reconstruct the deep ancestry of the people who made him, the civilization that shaped him, and the genetic legacy he unknowingly left behind.